And then we got to the end of the meeting and we're having a great time. I spent about an hour in like consultation with him because he was on his off day, and we just went into his workshop. What do you call like a physiotherapist's, I guess, practice? It's sort of like his place in like a professional, in a professional center where he's got like the bed and all the weights and everything.
A gym.
But imagine like a 65, 70-year-old man,
right,
like in a lab coat. And we got to the end and he's like, oh, and so, you know, how much would you charge for that sort of stuff? And I'm like, well, we've taken some good information today. I'll have to go and have a think about it, and I'll put together a proposal, and then I'll send it back to you. And he's like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, here's my... I think he wanted to give me a fax number originally, but I got him to give me an email address. And then I went away, I calculated, I was, this probably take that much time. I put you know, the milestones and how much he'd have to pay up front and all that. And he got back and he's like, oh yeah, I'm really keen to get going. I saw those numbers and obviously we can have a discussion about it. It's a little bit higher than I wanted. And I'm like, oh, I think I was pretty generous to begin with, honestly. And then he just ghosted. Just like quiet.
Really?
Yeah.
He must have gone onto Freelancer or Upwork and found someone in a developing nation that would do it for, you know, $5.
Not certain that didn't happen, if I'm honest, because I've had it happen a lot. Like, boomers are not the only ones that ghost you, but anytime I've worked with a boomer, once they have finished with use for you, you don't exist anymore. Like, it's not like, oh, we've decided to go with somebody else, like HR from the studio you were going to work for. It's like, sorry, we decided to go in another direction, but I'll keep your information. It's just, oh, I don't need that anymore. Drop like child with toy.
It's just like some dude, you know, on Tinder can't get what he wants, just ghosts someone on there.
Yeah, look, I don't know, man. Let's be charitable, he probably had a lot going on. He was a doctor, so I probably should have gone through his like receptionist or something instead of him. But you know, I've been ghosted by companies as well, so
yeah,
that one just hurt.
Yeah, I was a bit ghosted a few months ago, but I just called the guy up and I was like, yeah, hey, what's going on? And he was like, oh, yeah, you know, explain that he went with someone else. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's no problem. You know, if you actually wanted to negotiate a price, then I'm happy to do so. Even though I was going to giving you a good price anyway, but, you know, whatever.
Yeah, something I've always found with freelancing is that it's really easy to get in too deep. It's too easy to get excited about a project when you finally get a good project. And like, that project wasn't an amazing project for me. Like, it's not like making Space Marines and making them fight or whatever. Like, it was a pretty boring sort of subject matter, but it seemed pretty cut and dry. It seemed like something that I could focus on and pull out and just really like have something concrete on my portfolio then going forward. I was pretty keen to get it done. If I recall correctly, I had a similar one actually for a physiotherapist as well, because I was in this phase where I was sort of targeting professional centers, because they don't, you know, unleveraged market. And people don't tend to think they need visualization until they start to think about how useful it might be for them.
Right. So how did you target those people? Would you just
originally...
Also, is this included in the pod? Because this could be good content matter.
I was sort of treating it like it was.
Yeah, okay, cool. Continue.
Originally, it was just listed on one of the notice boards that I follow. So, like, I've got a bunch of email lists for jobs and that sort of thing. And then I got the idea from that. I was like, oh, well, you know, if he needs it, then probably other people do as well. I have to admit, I wouldn't call it a honey hole because I never really got a whole lot of work out of that. It's a lot of work to convince people who don't need who don't think they need the thing you're selling. And that actually feeds into one of the topics that we could talk about is professionalism in freelance, because I spent a lot of time convincing people, and really you shouldn't be spending time convincing people because that's unpaid labor.
Yeah.
Because and then just to finish the story, there was this other professional center physiotherapist who I ended up doing a very similar consultation with, and he ended up wanting to go forward, but I was having all kinds of red flags about the whole situation. I didn't want to go forward with it myself, but I didn't have a really good reason apart from vibes. And so then it was sort of like I wasn't ghosting the guy like the other one had done to me, because I was very aware of that in the situation.
I wasn't ghosting him. I was just not
No,
replying to him.
I was in constant communication with the guy, which was another problem because he just wouldn't leave it.
Right.
I was like, hey, I don't think this is a good fit. I think we need to move on to other people. It's not you, it's me.
Yeah.
But he just kept coming back. He's like, oh, so when can we get the project started? I'm like, I'm telling you, man, I don't want to do it. I think you should find somebody else. I don't think it'll be a good time for either of us. You need to go find somebody else to do this thing for you. But the thing was, because I'd convinced him that he needed it, I was his safety net.
Yeah.
And so that, what did I end up doing? I think I ended up either putting him onto somebody else or recommending places to post the job. I think that's what I did. I think I ended up recommending some places to go to look for somebody else to do the thing. But it just turned into a lot of work because the expectation had been set. And once you've done that much work to set an expectation, it's really hard to unset that expectation. So I think that's a good sort of vector into the podcast we want to talk about today. Because last week we promised that we'd talk about freelancing sort of as a whole. But on reflection, I think it's a bigger topic than just one pod. I really wanted to focus on following on from, I think, the third episode we did about productivity, taking freelance seriously and being a freelance professional rather than just a freelancer.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Like, there's definitely a distinction between, the people that go on The Future, which is a podcast sort of self-improvement series on YouTube, and then there's, people at uni that are like, oh, please, sir, let me do an animation for you so I can pay rent.
Yeah. And so the areas within that I find are probably the ones that are most divisive are, like I was saying, expectation setting, because your responsibility to the client is the expectations that you set at the beginning of that relationship and that interaction. And the other thing is how you are affecting the client pool as a whole. Like if you are on Upwork and Fiverr and all these other platforms calling yourself a freelancer doing logos for $10, I don't think that you're being a professional freelancer, and I think you're undercutting the importance of design and art,
Yeah.
And so I think professionalism is important, and I think I want to sort of dig into that today. What do you reckon?
Yeah, sounds like a good topic. So what are your thoughts on that? What would you say are some of your biggest concerns about how to conduct yourself more productively?
Well, I've had it both ways. I have definitely freelanced non-professionally, by which I mean I was trying to do it professionally, but I wasn't treating it seriously enough. And a lot of the time, like I alluded to earlier, it comes down to whether or not you're convincing people or whether you're filling a need. Because a client isn't a client until you've made them a client, right? People go on for days about freelance horror stories and, client expectations that are unreasonable. But at the end of the day, somebody is responsible for creating that person as a client, right?
Mm.
Somebody came in, set those expectations, and then either you are picking up the pieces because this person has sort of been wound up like a toy and set off into the market,
Yep. Geez,
or
sounds like a story I just heard.
or you are, yeah, thanks. Or you are receiving the results of your own issues, which is more like what I was talking about with that story, because I hadn't done a great job setting expectations. And so I guess the meat of the topic is less about our opinions on what professionalism in freelance is and more about the tools we can use for expectation setting and what looks like a professional approach that doesn't include convincing somebody that they need work done that they don't need done.
Yeah, I think that getting someone, in terms of like not convincing someone, is, you just kind of go for a market that is already established. But I'm gonna say going and convincing someone that they need what they don't realize that they need, it's one of those entrepreneurial things where it's high risk, high reward, where there's a good chance that you're going to hit your head against the wall for a while. But if it's something where you do have the ability to really push hard into, then you can really get some great rewards out of that.
Mm. Well, it's also like it's sort of like if it were a pure world, like if everything was white, it was like bright and clean and given over to what you would expect to be a logical and happy outcome. You could head into markets, expect there to be work for you at a reasonable price that doesn't require convincing, and then just prove yourself to be the cog that fits into that machine and then get that work. But we live in a world quite fundamentally shaped by people's experience. And a lot of the time, there is no education for the client around what to expect. There is only what is loudest. And I think what is loudest at the moment are these dollar a minute, freelancing sites that I think if you lived more casually within the space, you could be convinced is the only way that people are doing this.
Mm. Yeah, I've definitely come across some clients that do go for that, and I think, like you said, they don't really have the education or the understanding to know that there are people that they will charge more, but it's something where you get what you pay for, and then they'll go for these, dollar a minute websites, and they might get a really good result, but a lot of the time there are quite a few issues in that, and it really comes off with a negative impression on freelancing as a general, and that kind of overall and over time that sort of lowers the view and the expectation of freelancing, I think.
Well, it lowers the expectation for quality and price, right? So you can't come in with a big quote. Like, the history of me stopping freelancing is coming in with a quote that I think's fair for animation and getting ghosted. Like, by the end, that's all that was happening because I was doing hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation for advertising. Some of them wanted it, some of them didn't. Some of them just plain did not understand what the difference was. And I did a lot of work explaining that and trying to get them on the right side of the line to understand the value of that. But they would always just disappear when the quote came in, regardless of how convinced they were, because they don't actually, like, especially in the advertising space, they don't care about the quality. They've been trained not to care about the quality by the market. And so if you can get something that technically is animated, that technically fills the box you're trying to check, and you're in a studio setting, or you're in a more, let's say, a more comfortable position, and all you need to do to maintain that is to check a box for your boss to say, I have gotten animation for this video. If you see the column that says, $5,000, and you see the column that says $75, it's kind of a big disparity.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really see the difference in quality. I think that's something that is more broadly across society in general.
And that was the professionalism. See, when I was freelancing less professionally, as in I was taking it not taking it less seriously, but not approaching it in a mature way, I was saying, I can see the quality of this work. I know it's quality work. I will convince you of that, and then you will pay for it.
Yeah, I think that if you go for an established market where there are already people looking for these types of freelancers, then you're more likely to get someone that will pay what is an actual reasonable rate. There are clients out there. I think that if you go for a lot of those smaller local businesses, then that's much more likely to happen. If you go for a bigger business which has a marketing team or some a marketing individual or something like that, then they're probably going to see the value in good marketing a lot more than a physio down the road will, I think.
100%. And to be honest, I'm looking down the barrel of starting freelancing again. I'm just going to come out and say it. I probably won't work with anybody smaller than a particular sized company because it's just not fun.
Yeah.
And the market's been poisoned. It gets tricky when you don't have sort of like when your experience is at a certain grade and when what you can prove that you can do versus what you can't actually do is a little disparate because of the type of work you've been doing. It can be hard to get into those bigger contracts, but I think it's worthwhile because the amount of effort you put into getting them will be largely the same, but the reward will be A, more consistent, and B, probably larger.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm in a similar position to you where I'm looking to get some more freelancing and I'm thinking about how to go about doing that. And I shared recently one of the podcasts where I sent off an image to introduce myself to some clients and they kind of just scrunched up in the corner and kicked me in the gut and spat in the face. And honestly, it wasn't bad work. I thought it was pretty all right. There were
It just
things.
wasn't what they were looking for.
It just wasn't what they were looking for, and like I knew that it wasn't as great as it could have been. But I've sort of but that was because they are used to a really high level of production where they're getting renders done by a team of really experienced visualization artists. And so I've kind of thought, well, I could get there one day. I can get to those clients, but I think what I'm going to do is cut my teeth on some of the smaller businesses that are around. I'm going to go to some smaller builders, architects, and developers or whoever else, and get some of those smaller jobs. Yes, I'm going to take a hit in the gut in terms of how much I get paid, but I think if I build
there is flexibility built in because the bigger companies, they need something to just fit in and be what they need. They don't have time to womble about figuring out if you are what they need or whether you can do that, or give you time to, like, they're not going to accept an introductory rate for work that you're not completely confident you can do because you don't have a process around it, But if you go to those local guys and you say, hey, here's my rate normally, I'll cut that by 25% if you let me explore a little, they'll probably be like, hey, good deal.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just going around having a look at builders, architects, developers, whatever, and just kind of talking to them and saying, hey, look, this is what I'm doing. This is my rate. Uh, I'm doing a discount for an introductory rate, and I'm going to build up some experience with them, some professional experience, but also some portfolio, and hopefully in, I don't know, a year, maybe less, maybe more, I'm actually competitive with some of the big wigs.
Well, I would advise you figure out who the big wigs you're trying to be are, so that you can you can hold it there and compare and be like, am I at this level yet?
Yes, I have done that. When I
Yeah.
was working in architecture previously, I did have a look at some of the visualization work that had been done for the firm, and they were pretty decent jobs that were getting paid a pretty good amount of money that I would really be happy with, and so I do have them as a point of reference among
Mm.
just some other places as well.
So here's one. I was always given the advice by anybody who I asked who was doing this professionally and sustainably. They always say niche as hard as possible. Become the guy who does the thing.
Yes,
Do you
that's
think there's do you think there's any space within what you're doing to niche a little bit harder?
yes, there is. I'm not quite at that point too niche because I think that does require a bit more software experience. At the moment, what I'm trying to niche into is just being someone that can provide some really solid images of small developments from
Hmm.
houses to a small townhouse development. That I want to be the go-to guy for that in the intermediate sort of future. Beyond that, I'm looking to go into Unreal to do animations.
Mm. As in sort of like beauty renders, walkthroughs, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, walkthrough renders.
Yeah, and like you can even start looking into some VR with that.
Yeah.
Even if it's just like phone based like walkthroughs and that sort of thing. Once you've got that active sort of skill set that's a bit higher than the college norm, that's where you can start saying, okay, rates are going up because you're providing a specific service that can also be additive to other people's work. So which is another tool in being a professional freelancer, is figuring out what the work consists of. Because when I was freelancing, when I didn't know my ass from my elbow, I wasn't doing very well with that. I would always take on a project, and because I wasn't setting the expectations of the bounds of the project, welcome to scope creep city, because the client would be like, oh well,
Yeah.
I need this, and you are where I get this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So rather than I am doing the animations on this project, I am actually very experienced, you know, online marketing guy now. Like not super experienced, but I've had to come up with campaigns for people because that's the level that they were at. They're like, okay, I have this video now. What do I do with it?
Post it.
Yeah. It's like not my problem, man. Like these days, that's what it's gonna be. It's not my problem, man. But back in the day, if they kept paying, I just kept working
I
because
yeah, I when I started out freelancing, in my quotes, I set the exact expectation. I said, I'm charging this much for these things. And that's that.
yeah, and you have to be so specific, and you have to get it down to even like revisions, how many revisions they get for free, and then how much a revision after that costs, and where the revision time ends, so that they can't go back and revise something that is beyond a certain lock-in point.
Yes, that is something I'm still finessing. For me, I've got, I think, what am I quoting at the moment? I think I'm doing 2 free revisions per image. Which I think is a bit generous.
It's pretty standard. I guess it depends on the confidence you have in your idea.
Mm.
Like you're always running this balance between I am confident that this is right, so you get revisions because they're in the contract, but I really don't think we need them because I am the professional, trust me and my skill set.
Yeah.
Or I am not confident, whatever you want, man, you know?
Yeah, I think by putting in too many free revisions, you definitely is a sign of low confidence, I think,
Yeah. And
and unprofessionalism.
it's not respecting yourself as a professional, saying, I get what you want, but you want that through me. You've come to me for a reason, probably. Unless you just sort of like closed your eyes, covered your face with one hand and then used the other one to pick it out of, I was going to say the phone book, but I don't know where you pick things out of these days. But yeah, and it comes down to, again, expectation setting. And it's like, what do you look like to them? Which sort of feeds into the next thing I want to talk about around this, which is...
Before we go into that next thing,
yeah,
I just realized we didn't do an intro.
Well, we can toss it in at the beginning later.
Well, for anyone that's actually listening this far, this is the GitGud.CG podcast with Kris and Jayden. Please like and subscribe.
If you like and leave a comment on the YouTube channel, we will probably, if it's nice and you seem like a cool person, read it out on the podcast and talk about it. So if you've got anything burning desires that you want to hear us talk about in relation to productivity, freelance, CG, and just getting work at the current point in time, we'd be happy to take a look at that. So we're looking for a bit more audience interaction, and we're working on ways to sort of increase the vectors that we can gain that.
Yes. So far, we've only had one very polite commenter saying, please like, comment, and subscribe.
And I'm pretty sure I know who that was. Thanks, Mum.
So what was your next segment?
Well, while I roll my brain back to that point and desperately try to remember, as a freelancer, you have a perspective from already having a skill set. You have a master's degree in architecture, right?
Yep.
And you sort of have a built-in market and you have a built-in audience. I want you to scrap that for a second. I want you to put yourself in your game art shoes, and I want you to try and be a freelancer from that perspective, because marketing a nice to have or a entertainment product is 1,000 times harder than something that people actually actively need. How do you think you would go about not convincing people they need it, but finding places to freelance in that? Because I think a lot of the people listening could get to a point where they're like, well, it's really easy if you've got a background in architecture to go talk to development consultants and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point that you bring up. I have been actually considering this in, should I also start to pursue, later down the track, a bit of freelance game art? And, there's the obvious ones where you can go for Upwork. And, that it's an alright place to cut your teeth on, but it's not sustainable long term, especially when you're living in a country like Australia. You're most likely going to get a lot of really low paying jobs where you will need a casual job outside of that in order to just get by. So I think what would I do? I think I would probably cut my teeth on Upwork Freelancer as much as I can, and then on the side of that, work on personal projects, and then also be pursuing game studios. Locally preferred, but anywhere really, game studios, and saying, hey, I'm available to freelance, here's my portfolio, here's my rate, maybe tell them my rate, maybe be upfront with that. And that's what I've been...
Little bit behind the scenes action. I think that sites like Upwork, Freelancer, and Fiverr are race to the bottom nests of vipers which are undercutting the industry. So keep that in mind as I ask the next question, which is, how do you justify casually getting your skills up at the expense of the freelance industry for the thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah, it is. It can be. I think it's if you are okay with doing that, if you're gonna go, well, everyone else does that, then I might as well. I think outside of that, it would be pretty difficult to do. I think you've really just got to work on your personal projects as much as you can. Use whatever personal network that you have. Go on LinkedIn, try and contact some people on there, and just ask people on LinkedIn, hey, I'm a freelance game artist. Do you have any work going, any contract work?
Right, but why wouldn't you do that first? Why are you going to Upwork first?
Well, because it's just the easiest place to start. You can. Well, it's not the easiest place to start in that I've tried it, and you look at the
Here's my
yeah.
pitch. Here's my pitch. You're going to be paid beans anyway. You're not going to get a living wage, right? You're not even going to get experience being an active freelancer because you're going through a platform that handles a lot of that stuff for you. Why wouldn't you just come up with your own personal projects, create your own client, and then have something for your portfolio? Wouldn't that have the same effect?
Yeah, I think if the benefit of going on Upwork or Freelancer or something like that is that you do have that benefit where you can monumentally screw up and it's okay. It's not like Upwork is going to be your long-term gig. It's something where if you were to have, say, a local studio as your first client and you don't have that professionalism as a freelancer and you really make a mistake, then that can spread through the local industry of where you live or where that studio is.
Right, but that's if you're coming at them. That's if you're coming at them being like, "Hey guys, I'm pretty hot shit. You really got to get on this train," and then turns out that instead of hot shit, it's a pile of crap.
I don't know. I think there's more ways to screw up than just saying, "Hey, I'm hot shit," and then you turn out to be a pile of crap. I think there's all sorts of reasons that mistakes can happen.
Which is why I think communication is important. But at some point, you're gonna have to do it anyway, and it's not like places that are taking on freelancers are like gazelles on the Serengeti being surprised by the freelance lion. They kind of get what's happening. They know what's around. If you're going with a large enough studio, they've probably worked with beginning freelancers before. If they've hired you, they know what they're getting.
I don't know if many studios would be getting some brand new squeaky clean artists. I don't know how many. Obviously, they come from somewhere.
Well, that's where portfolio comes in, right? So why don't you spend the time, get your job in a cafe, get part-time work in a school or at a library or whatever, and then try to get good work done. Surely the work itself is going to speak to that. And then beyond any sort of freelance professionalism that you're supposed to be entering the space with, if you're just honest and you're like, hey, I'm capable of this level of work, which I think is good, you might agree. I am not the best, most experienced freelancer, but here is what I would charge to do some work for you. You leave it up to them. It's like you don't get to decide how your art is viewed on Instagram, right? People like it or they hate it, but you make it anyway. You don't get to decide whether they think they're getting value from your offer, right? You propose an offer that is fair to you and you try to take into account their project and you try to make it fair for them and you try to make it a win-win and you try to communicate that. At the end of the day, it's on them to say yes or no.
I think what's really important is, first of all, confidence and competence, and also honesty. And so I think going into a proposal with a freelancer, with a studio, and saying, hey, here's what I can do, and being honest in what you can do, and being able to say, yes, I can do this, and being honest in doing so, you're going to be more likely to get that job. And that's where
And
I think
that's
that things like Upwork come in, where you can get a
well,
bit of
that's where I
experience there.
think things like Upwork come out, though, because what you're not getting is that experience communicating with the client. They're putting a barrier there. They're separating you. You see it as the big client zombie. You've been on freelance horror stories, and the client is this monolith that if you're contacting, it's through the platform and it's for details they didn't yet provide. Like you are coming in and you're actively choosing to take work from somebody who has been prepared with an expectation that you didn't set. So in my opinion, that's not practice being professional. That's practice being non-professional.
I have done some work on Upwork, and by God, it was horrible. But I think that I did communicate with some people. I put a proposal in for a job, and there
You're
was...
communicating with them, but the agreement has already been set by the platform, right? From go to woe, you are coming in at a stage that isn't the beginning.
I mean, that's going to be the case
And
for a lot of freelancing as well.
how?
Well,
You get to decide on the contract and you get to decide on the milestones if you're freelancing for a company. All they're doing is coming up with the work. If they've got an Upwork account, Upwork has already conditioned them as a client to expect something from that platform. You're not saying here is how I work, here is what to expect. Upwork has said here is how we work, here is what to expect, and then they're expecting that. So you don't get to set those expectations coming in.
you do actually. You can set milestones, you set your prices, you write proposals.
How do I?
I get that.
It's
I get.
it's a framework rather than a free like it's a path drawn on a field. If you're freelancing, you have the field. If you're in Upwork, you have the path. It has a few branches in it, but you can only follow the painted line.
And I think that it's honestly not the worst place to start. You know, if you're looking in both, you're looking in, say, LinkedIn, or you're contacting studios directly or whatever, you know, you might as well just browse Upwork and see if there's anything worth it. You don't have to apply for everything. You know, you can be browsing on there for a month and see one thing and apply for that if it seems
So, but
reasonable to you.
you're coming from the perspective of somebody who has nothing to show, right? I would argue that it's easier and more responsible to get a studio job, even if it's like an advertising studio position, 9 to 5, and get some of that experience before you start freelancing. I would say that that is easier than making a living off Upwork.
Oh, Upwork is not possible to make a living on
So then why are you doing it?
because you just get some experience in having client work. It's
Wouldn't
definitely
wouldn't you
not
rather
ideal.
get the wouldn't you rather get the practice in professionalism by working somewhere that also gives you the network?
It's not so easy to just get a job in an industry. You know, it could be, say your main goal is to get a job in a game studio, and you want to just infill some of that time by working on personal projects and any freelance that you have. You might as well just explore all options and check out Upwork or check out Freelancer or People Per Hour. It's not ideal as a long-term thing. Well, it's not that's not ideal. It's just not possible as a long-term thing. But I think it's fine to just get some experience on there.
Well, look, you're not going to convince me, and I don't agree. But it does lead into the next point with that, which is the undercutting of the work that you would eventually want to get into. Because if you do work on Upwork, you are taking jobs away from and undercutting the potential price framework for somebody who is actively freelancing in the area you are. Any of those jobs that you're getting off Upwork could have been a call for freelancers through another medium.
Well,
And by charging Upwork rates or getting undercut by a team of people in India who are just charging rates that you can't compete with, you've already taken the potential of that job away from somebody who might as well be you in a few years.
Well, this is where I do and don't become a hypocrite, because I do agree with you in that it is extremely annoying to be undercut by someone on Upwork, but I think that, as we discussed before, these cheap clients, they're always going to exist. Let's just give them a platform to go and exist on. Like, I think even if Upwork didn't exist, or any of those
No, but what it
platforms.
does, it incubates them as that kind of client. Clients aren't, minted at a client factory. They are created
Really?
by their first experience.
Yeah, I suppose. I think that you're always going to have, your tight asses though. Does Upwork, increase that sort of mentality?
What
Probably.
it does is it allows them to continue to be tight asses.
Yeah, I suppose I'd agree on
If
that.
if tight asses don't have access to an easier way to do it or a cheaper way to do it, they have to raise their standards. And what that does is raise the standards of the industry, and it makes it easier to charge what you're worth.
Sometimes a lot of people that get work done through Upwork and such, they realize that, you get what you pay for, and what you get is not a nice thing.
Yeah, well, that comes back to the quality argument.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, quality is an effective way to judge the actual validity of a project. I know other people do not agree with that. That the quality has to be good enough. It's like that old Krusty poster from The Simpsons. It's like, it's not just good, it's good enough. And I don't agree with good enough. I agree that everybody wants the best thing possible for the least amount of money. But I don't sympathize with anybody who wants something mediocre for the best amount of money.
Yeah. And I think that Upwork does allow people to continue to be that way, but I think you're always going to have those people. There's always, regardless of if there's a platform, there's always going to be a race to the bottom.
Yes, and the more people who engage in that race to the bottom, the lower they take the floor of that market. And so I guess what I'm saying is that I agree that it will always exist. What I'm arguing is that you don't have to interact with it. You can actually create for yourself a better existence that will, a rising tide floats all boats. You can create for yourself through a little bit more focus and a little bit more professionalism and a little bit more work, a longer term, more sustainable freelance career. And I just don't think Upwork has a part in that.
I think it can play. It definitely does lower the tide, as you said, but I think it does have a part to play in that it is one way for you to get some experience at the start. It's not something that you have to do. There are definitely other revenues or other methods to do that.
I have to admit,
Yeah.
with this argument, we're sort of like tapping into a bit of old university lecturer me, where I would always tell my students not to work for free and not to do this sort of thing. And that if they wanted experience to get into the industry, they use the time that they have, because time, not money, is their currency.
Mm.
And I would tell them, use that time. Find your friends, make cool stuff, get noticed.
I'd say that's pretty good advice. Because while I think that Upwork is something that you can do if you want to do, it's not something I would do, and it's for the reasons that you've been making.
I know you're playing devil's advocate, but my point is that I think there are better ways to go about it. They're not immediately financial, which is why there's that barrier.
And also,
but
to sort of add,
finance doesn't become your currency until it is. And until then, the currency you have is time and creativity. And that's a very special time that I think people really should protect, because once they get into the industry and if they're trying to make a living off something that they actually have a passion for and that they enjoy doing, they're going to have less of that time and they're going to have less practice doing that and doing it quickly. And I think for a career, setting up a precedent where they're able to create because of creation's sake, using time as their currency instead of currency as their currency, is important, because that will also feed into their later lives when they are working full time and they want to squeak out, some sort of personal project which might actually turn into something, because that's what we live in. We live in the attention economy. If you don't have personal projects, you're not getting noticed.
Yeah, and I think to make a point that along your lines is that if you do decide to go down the path of time is your most valuable asset, which I have also sort of agreed with for a long time, but I think by doing that, that allows you to be far more passionate and invested in your own projects. It requires a certain type of discipline to know when to put something down, but it can really allow you to really explore all sorts of creativity that places, especially places like Upwork, but just freelancing in general, might not allow for you.
And I have to admit that I am definitely on the freelancing masochist side of the spectrum, where
I like pain.
yeah, I will turn down things because I can. I will not do things when I see red flags. And I will do that at my own detriment.
A man of standard. Treat him mean, keep him keen.
Yeah, but I think that also is where multiple streams of income come from. Because if you're solely reliant on one form of income, that's when you're fragile, and that's when you get into those positions where you don't have the flexibility to turn things down. And if you don't have the flexibility to turn things down, then you're trapped, and you'll feel trapped, and you won't create good work.
I think,
and you'll stay in that cycle.
I think that's where it's interesting with what a lot of YouTubers do is they'll have their main audience, and then they'll have several plugs for their own revenue stream, where it'll be like Patreon. They'll have Gumroad where they're selling some stuff, and then they might have some courses or whatever, and then they'll have ad rev on top of that, and so that's a pretty interesting way of how this isn't really directly related to freelancing. It's probably something we can talk about another time, but it's a pretty interesting way that YouTubers and artists sort of diversify themselves and have a relatively safe income stream.
Yeah, and I think flexibility and multiple income streams gives you a robust, like a safety born from robustness, whereas people tend to feel secure in a 9-to-5 job. But how secure is that really? Like, look at places that, like, in Australia we've got the JobKeeper program, but now we don't. And you go into lockdown and you work in retail, and retail isn't allowed to open.
You're screwed. I mean,
You're just as screwed as if somebody cancels a freelance project on you. You're not any more secure for that single stream of income.
Yeah, and that's the situation that I'm in now. I work in a cafe just 2 days a week while I am getting good at art, and the C word, the disease that shall not be named, is popping its head back up in Sydney at the moment. And I live a few hours away from Sydney in Canberra, and we're getting kind of worried here because it's the Delta strain, which is really starting to...
Old news where I am, but...
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's that which is really starting to spread because they haven't handled it the same way that they did in Melbourne. And so I'm kind of thinking, the point you were making is that how secure is a job really? And the more casual the job, which is what I am, the least secure it is. You can have pretty good security in a job, but I have a friend who was telling me about it. He had a colleague that during these whole, it was either the GFC or it was during COVID, one of the two. He was telling me about one of these people that works there. They've been a staff member for 15 years, and they just let him go.
Yep. See ya.
Full-time staff member with all the safety nets and security that it's advertised as, and they were just like, see ya.
And it's because it's a lie. Like, that kind of work doesn't actually exist anymore. You don't spend your 20 years and get your gold watch and retire with benefits. You are just as much a worker as the next casual 14-year-old, you know? Like, actually, what's the working age? 16?
I think it's 14 and a half or something.
Yeah, something like that. But you are just as expendable as they are to business owners, and that's the rhetoric that business owners have. You know, like, you go on LinkedIn and you join any, you know, business owners group or something. They've got all of these, like, you know, inspirational placards up and things like that. That's like, you know, hire fast, fire fast, and all that sort of thing, because it's all about their best interest. There's no community to it. It's no, you know, Fred's been here for 25 years and his wife just died and his house had to be remortgaged. It's Fred needs to go because, you know, his name went red on the spreadsheet.
Goodbye, Fred.
Goodbye, Fred.
Yeah.
And so I think actually the safest way to live these days is to have multiple streams of income controlled by you. Yes, it is hard work. No, I do not have those in place at the moment, but that is where I'm going to be headed.
Yeah, me too.
So I have a couple of streams of income, most of them dormant at the moment because of, you know, moving, marriage, life. But that's where I think I have to go, because that's where I've landed on this whole thing. I've had to do some really deep thinking about what the future is going to look like. And I think the most responsible way to live is to be in control of how you are able to live. And I don't think putting my literally the majority of my daytime life in the hands of an employer who I have no confidence has my best interests in mind.
Yeah. And you know what the best thing is that we are at a point in time where this has never been easier to do before.
It's never been this possible.
And we, you know, sorry to if there's some older listeners, but we're kind of at the age where it's almost perfect to be able to do it. You know, like, if you're in your, like, if you're from 18 to 35, you're pretty much in a somewhat perfect position to start your career off out that way.
And I would argue also that if you're older than that, you will find the highest leverage in turning around and offering services to those people with that goal in mind. Because it doesn't mean that it's not like, sorry, you're beyond this and you can't do anything about it. You just have to accept what the modern reality is, and you have to pivot.
I'll make the point that I think that, you know, people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, provided they can still definitely take advantage of having multiple income streams and freelancing, because the thing that they have that a lot of us younger people don't have is they've got work experience. They have a lot of knowledge to translate into, you know, something really great. The trade-off is that they've got the experience in work, but we've got the experience in social media
and technology. Like, you and I were in a bit of a transition period where we recall using, you know, magnetic tape in our Walkmans.
I never had a Walkman.
But, or whatever, like, you know, you used to have a VHS player.
Yeah, we were kind of born on that early 90s transition period, where we mostly grew up with the internet and technology. So we're not quite Zoomers, but we're not quite Boomers.
Yeah, translators.
yeah, we're translators.
It's actually the Zoomers that I'm more concerned about as far as finding a way forward than the Boomers, because the Zoomers have an interesting perspective where there's never not been the systems that are in place now, which I tend to think are unhealthy systems. For instance, there was a study that people did that showed that because all of the sounds we hear on a daily basis are imitations of actual sounds through the same type of technology, so like the diaphragm in your headphones or in your speakers, right?
Mm.
If they want to really get somebody's attention nowadays, they put a physical klaxon on something. Like the air-based air horns. Because we don't hear that, we're not used to it, and it's more alarming. Because every sound you heard used to be like a buzzer or a bell or a horn. It was always different sounds. Or like when you listen to music, it was the vibrations on a pin on a record, right?
Mm.
But every sound we hear nowadays is an imitation of that through a diaphragm. And so our brains and our bodies are used to it. And so sirens and alarms aren't actually as alarming to us anymore.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I I do live near what is it? I do live near a main road, and I will get some sirens come by often enough, and I'll just be sitting there, la la la, and then a siren just goes wheel 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 past, and I'm like, yep, fair enough.
And yeah, and the point of me telling that story is that it's an example of if you grow up normalized to this stuff without examining it, without the ability to examine it because you've never had something to compare it to. That's where I think our position as, having had times before the internet and
The
having
land before
VHS
time.
players and all that sort of thing, it gives you something to compare to.
Mm.
You have to be careful not to do that whole Make America Great Again Golden Age nonsense
Jesus.
where it's like you're looking back to a particular time that never existed because you remembered it more fondly because like literally everything was done for you. But because you were a child, I should mention. The problem I see coming in the future is from anybody born, say, after 1998, they are going to be digital natives. And for instance, when I was working in a preschool, they don't allow iPads because for developmental purposes, people need to connect neurons that are like the physicality of blocks and Legos and, the tactile feel of Play-Doh and that sort of thing, because a lot of the time in their day-to-day life, instead of blocks and Legos and all that sort of thing, they're playing apps on the iPad, right? And that's creating different neural pathways. And it's also giving them a non-physical understanding of those objects. The physics they understand are the physics of the program. And so
that would make some really good programmers.
It would, but what it's also going to do is like make it harder for them to put a glass on a surface because they don't have the muscle memory to do that, right? Like they're not placing things of different masses on top of other things, and they're not using their spatial depth perception.
I think that's probably a bit of a hyperbolic answer, but yeah, I see where you're going with that.
It's an extreme example, but it's also coming from observation that I've had in real life. So I understand that it might seem a bit alarmist, but it puts me in a position where I think that the people who are going to have to do a lot of work in the future to see a world outside of the systems presented to them are the Zoomers. Because if they're presented with Upwork and they said this is how you freelance, they have less reason to believe that that is not the case or that there's anything outside of that.
Right. Yeah, I have found that the best way for me to freelance is cold calling. And as, that sort of translator generation, I don't like phone calls. I could only imagine how bad it is for a Zoomer. Boomers are fine with making phone calls because it's what they grew up with. It's their whole life. It's only the last few years that people have been like, ew, why are you calling me?
Yeah. Or like, why is your phone not on silent? Like,
Yeah.
I saw a thing on Twitter recently that was like somebody commenting on the fact that a boomer wondered why that they'd never wanted to be called, and they were like, well, all I get on this thing call wise is grandma once a week and then 1,000 robots from India trying to steal my credit card details. So this mode of communication is kind of dead to me.
Yeah, that's how it is for me. The only phone calls I really get are from my mum, and that's it. Like I'll do I'll FaceTime with my girlfriend, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's really it. I'll occasionally just talk to a family member, but if I really have to make a phone call, it'll be through Messenger because I just don't have anyone's phone numbers.
Yeah, you have their name, and it honestly that makes more sense.
Mm.
You have their name, so you find their name and you talk to
Yeah,
them, rather than the string of digits that
yeah.
represents them.
99% of the time, I will communicate with people through Messenger, which some people will say is less, like, I don't know what's the word, human, or something like that. But outside of that, I
To
do also use Discord just to play games with friends, so we can.
And that's the thing. If you don't know what Discord is, you're limiting your opportunities. If you don't make phone calls, you're limiting your opportunities. So, as far as freelance goes, you really do have to be across a lot of things. Like, for instance, I don't think, okay, this is an assumption, but I don't think Zoomers use email as much.
Yeah, I don't think so. Email is a bit like dated to me. Like I use
But
it.
a lot of my freelance comes through job boards on
Yeah,
email.
I mean I think that is going to change because as Zoomers get more of a position in society, their modes of communication are going to be how you find technology. So if you are mainly finding jobs through emailing and through calling, then there's going to come a point where that's going to get pretty difficult. You've got to keep up with what the Zoomers are doing.
That actually comes up to an interesting point, which is client communication.
hmm yeah. What do you want to say about client
Yeah,
communication?
I was just thinking that what I tend to do in the past is email and phone call. But of late, I've been considering setting up a Slack specifically for the project. The question that I had around that was that if I had, say, a boomer client who didn't know what Slack was, could I easily onboard them to that? Because it would be really easy for me to do quick project updates through that just to keep them in the loop without actually having to spend time, consoling them and keeping them up to date. And that would be a really good
I don't know
workflow.
about that, man. Like, I've had some people be like, "How do I open a PDF?"
Yeah.
So
And
I
that's,
think you've got to pick your clients. If they seem like a tech savvy person, then yeah. But then even then, they might not be a tech savvy person. They just might not want to bother. They might just want you to communicate with them through call or email, and they don't want to have to check something.
well, that's expectation setting as well. A lot of the wisdom that I've gotten is you need to have office hours. Like I will be available to contact between 5 and 6 in
Mm,
the evening on Thursday.
definitely, and I think that
Like,
is that actually comes off onto professionalism. If you appear to be professional in sorry, if you let people know, oh, I'm available 24/7, then I think that it's not good for multiple reasons. But one, it doesn't look professional, but two, you're going to have someone calling you up at 9:30 on a Sunday night or a Saturday night going, hey, can you make these changes? I need them done now. If you set that expectation early on, then
and that's the thing. I have done what I consider professional freelance, and I've done what I consider unprofessional freelance. And I have been in the position where the client thinks it is fine to contact you at God knows what hours to make those changes because, like, I was dumb and on a Sunday evening one time I shot off an email asking a question because I wanted the answer by Monday.
yeah, yeah, no, you,
And that was on me for creating that expectation. And then literally at that time, for the rest of the project, I would even get phone calls from the client because I had set the expectation that that is when I can be contacted.
I there was this what was it that I used to listen to the radio when I was driving back and forth to work. That was the only time in my life that I ever really listened to the radio.
All
And
right, Boomer.
yeah, back in my day. But they were talking about, it was the youth radio station, by the way. So
Okay, Boomer.
they were talking about having time away from work, and they had a lot of people calling in or texting and saying, yeah, like my work phone is my personal phone, and I will just I can't tune out from work because I literally have to be on all
Yeah,
the time. I've always got this thing that lights up around me, and it'll be an email from someone, and I feel like I can't ignore that. I feel like I can't say to my boss, I'm not available right now.
I specifically went to, I think it was Target, and I bought the cheapest, oldest candy bar phone I could, and I put like $50 worth of SIM card in it, and then I used that for freelancing. Because not only is that number new, but you have the reasonable expectation that if somebody's calling you on that number, it's a client.
Or someone from
Where,
India trying to steal your money.
or somebody from India trying to steal your money. But because the number's new, it's on less call lists, which is the problem. Like, I don't pick up unknown numbers on my regular phone. I don't pick up my phone generally. I wish I could turn the phone part of my phone off, and then I just have this separate phone that I use. I get that even a cheap candy bar phone might be fiduciarily exclusive for some people, but that is my solution to that problem.
Yeah.
But that's only if they do want to communicate through calls. Like, if they have your email, they've got your email. Like,
Yeah, I suppose so. I'm not at. Maybe that's something I'll do in the future, but at this point, yeah, I don't want to carry around a second phone.
well, I don't carry it around. I just leave it in my office
Fair enough.
because I have office hours, right? I say I'm available to call between 5 and 6 on such and such days during the week, and then I make myself available for those times. Any time other than that, I could turn it off because they should know that they're not going to get through to me anyway.
Yeah, and I think a good point to that is, if you do have that, then if someone is calling you on the weekends and you can see the number but you don't recognize it, you can pick up safely, assuming that it's not some client going, oh yeah, can I have this revision right now?
And you've removed the social element of having to be like, mate, it's the weekend.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that pretty much covers a lot of what I wanted to do professional wise. And we also dipped a bit into sort of like how to keep yourself safe and sane freelancing.
Yeah, I think that we could probably go into that a little bit further. Back to what maybe not today for another podcast, and we can sort of refresh what we had done in a previous one, where it was just methods to stay sane and a bit more mindful. So that's something we could do for a future podcast.
How to manage your own expectations rather than client expectations.
Yeah, manage your own expectations. I think we talked about going for walks and that sort of stuff last time, didn't we? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's keep that one on the back burner. I won't declare what we'll be talking about next because that's not really as defined a topic as we normally do. So it'll be a bit of a mystery bag. We've got a couple in the tube that we can maybe fold it into.
Yeah. I suppose I'm just looking. We've got a list, and I'm looking at some pretty interesting topics that we have coming up. So definitely
sounds like it's a good time to like,
subscribe,
comment, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon.
Yep, and definitely come back and watch the future episodes and watch all our previous ones, please.
Obviously, because this is this is probably a good example of the type of content you'll be getting if this is your first time listening. And I think number 3 was actually number 3 and 4 actually were pretty good. Is this
number 3 or is this number 4?
This is number 5.
Oh.
Man.
Oh, what? Oh, I thought this was number 4. Yeah, right. Damn.
No, number 5. We're getting through them.
Yeah, man, we are pumping them out. We should start to release some early.
Well, I don't know about that. We'll talk about that off mic.
Maybe not. I suppose the backbone is
Yeah,
good.
sort of getting a bit into how the sausage is made there. You want to feel like that,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, we're present in your ear, 6 inches away. At the time that you're listening to this, that's when we're talking about it. Because we're your
Wow.
friends, and this is a parasocial relationship.
That was incredibly ASMR.
You're welcome.
Ooh, that gave me shivers.
What do you think? That's one of my streams of income?
Okay, stop now.
Okay. If they haven't been scared away by that, if anybody was interested in getting more from you, Mr. Jayden, where would they go to find you online?
Well, I have now sorted my craft, and you can now find me at JSTO_art or JSTO_art on Twitter, Instagram, and probably some other places too.
Yeah, we'll get your LinkedIn profile sorted out because that's where the cool kids hang out.
Yeah, man.
LinkedIn.
Chris, where are they finding you?
You can find me at animatorkris or animatorkris on any of the platforms. If you find me not at animatorkris on any of the platforms, don't follow me, because I only want you to follow me where I've said that you can, because I have boundaries.
He doesn't need to have them respected. It's fine. You can follow.
I respect you, audience. So respect me back. I demand it.
How respectful for you to demand.
I can respectfully demand, just like I can respectfully bid them adieu.
Hopefully this episode has been better with my microphone. If anyone is still listening, or if this hasn't been cut out, I'm aware that I have sounded very nasally in the last few podcasts and a little bit air blowy. I think maybe I'll get a new mic somewhat soonish. Thinking of getting a Blue Yeti.
Well, that's what all the cool kids are using. I can only speak for myself, but I mean, you know.
You sound pretty buttery smooth.
Buttery smooth. That's when I
All
don't fall into my ochre, but that's another problem.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Like and subscribe, comment. See ya.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Shut the hell up. In case this is the beginning of the podcast, I did it yet again. I forgot to hit record, but the podcast had not even really started, so that's all right.
Well, yeah, luckily we weren't 20 minutes in and, arms deep in, self-revelation and good content.
Yeah. But back to the more pressing matter.
There's going to be a section on the podcast which is long conversations with Kris's wife.
And then you just get like a soundbite of her being like, Kris!
You get over here! No, that's mean. She's nice.